I call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and I was certainly riding with one of them.
So in this segment, we're going to be discussing a BBC Newsnight clip where they interview different people and kind of discuss with them the Brexit impact. So they did speak to members of the public.
Thought it was a bad idea.
They did speak to members of the public, but also certain politicians, and it's still pretty scary. But yeah, let's dig into this.
Yeah, and I can see why people were convinced by Boris and, the various things that were said, like 350 million per week for NHS, which hasn't happened.
Don't know that it's made a huge difference to my life.
If you look at the cost of living, generally, that would have made an impact to your life. If you look at the price we're paying for food and for energy, I think it would have done.
I thought it was a good idea at the time, and I still think it's a good idea.
Why? Why don't the journalists ask them why?
Just a complete disaster what's happening. I thought we'd get a hit for at least a year to 2 years, then the UK would eventually come back to us and we'd be a rich
What does the UK will come back to us? What does that mean?
country, but it just hasn't happened.
The thing is, we are a rich country. It's just the wealth is distributed really badly in the UK. And I wonder with the lady and with the swimmer guy, given that they're by the beach, have they noticed a large increase in pollution that's happening thanks to water companies dumping more and more sewage into the waterways and getting away with it? The EU's Clean Water Directive would have kicked in within the next couple of years. But obviously, we're not going to follow that because of Brexit. So I wonder how happy they are with polluted waterways right next to them. And then we cut to them talking about the polls as well, saying Brexit was a bad idea, but why that hasn't really translated politically into much, given the two major parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, are still kind of pro-Brexity kind of parties. You can argue that with Starmer, I think, without getting beaten up.
A growing sense of unease, but we're not reaching for the EU bunting.
So there's absolutely no doubt that people think it has gone badly. Around 60% of people say that the impact on the economy has been worse than they expected. A significant amount say the same for public services, say the same for imports and exports. But that does not quite equate to wanting to open the whole can of worms all over again. Yes, people say it's gone badly, but they're not necessarily keen on either going back into the EU or indeed having a second referendum.
And I wonder why that's the case. People aren't too comfortable with it. Maybe it's because it's a big can of worms and people remember how kind of toxic the referendum was in the 2019 election. Maybe that's the case. I don't know, but clearly opinions need to change. We've gotten to the point where we accept Brexit was a bad idea, but I don't know how we move on from that point, which is the key issue for me fundamentally.
Still a Brexiteer, yes.
This is funny. This interview is quite funny. The stuff he says here is amazing.
Was I naive in thinking that events wouldn't get in the way of a perfect separation? Absolutely. I'm guilty of that.
Now less certain about that decision, though sensing new hope about Brexit.
It's been very difficult, hasn't it? I think it would have been far more successful without, obviously, COVID, Ukraine, zero COVID in China.
How would it have been more successful though? That's what I don't get. What's surely we should see that success in the next couple of years then, as your party keeps saying the pandemic is pretty much over. You can argue about zero COVID in China, but the thing is that impacts the entire world. I don't understand what his points are here.
I call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and I was certainly riding with one of them.
So he's talked about, the four horsemen of the apocalypse are, I think, in the Bible, which you're talking, I think it's death. So the four horsemen of the apocalypse are conquest, war, famine, and death. And so he's saying he backed one of the four horsemen who are, the ones who are meant to bring, I think, near the end of the world here. Madness, absolute madness. Hilarious stuff here. And he's backed one of the things that are meant to bring the apocalypse. Hilarious. When you think of the damage that famine, death, war, and conquest can do, that's a really funny comparison.
The Brexit supporter. I think there is opportunity. I'm pleased that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, and Macron seem to be building a relationship.
They have
that relationship was really damaged by Brexit, and you've got Andrea Leadsom, who talks absolute drivel in this clip here.
I'm so certain that the UK's future lies outside of the EU. So it was the greatest pleasure and privilege to be able to make that case to the British public with no holds barred. You know, why should we leave? Well, here's why we should leave. And so for me, I was absolutely passionate about it and still remain the same today. So I think it is going to be the best decision we ever made.
And she won't say why. You know, she doesn't say why it's the best decision we've ever made. She just says it's a decision and it's great. And yeah, that's pretty embarrassing. I would have pressed her more on it. But, you know, Nicholas Watt, I think he's decent. But again, I think he can do a lot more to kind of press people on these questions. Maybe not always members of the public, but I think politicians. So we cut to a member of the SNP who talks about the impact of the referendum and Brexit on kind of the SNP views.
From a UK perspective, the EU referendum's a standalone event. From a Scottish perspective, it's intricately linked with the independence referendum that was just 18 months later. So there's been a material change in circumstance, that is obvious. The UK that a lot of people in Scotland voted to stick with doesn't exist anymore. The UK...
Remember, we told the Scots, if you leave the Union, you will not be given membership of the EU. We will veto your membership of the EU. We said something on those lines, and that voting to stay in the Union meant that voting to basically say yes to staying in the EU. That's what we told them. But obviously things have changed dramatically now. The UK is no longer in the EU. And in independent Scotland, it's free to try and join the EU, get full membership, if they so wish to do that, which I think they do.
The UK economy in 2016 was 90% the size of the German economy. It's now 70% the size of the German economy. Now, that's not because Germany's been running away, buying lots of buns, having a great time. It's because the UK has slid back and is demonstrably the sick man of Europe. And we can escape that with independence for Scotland in Europe. And,
you know, he's absolutely right there, given the fact that the UK has still not gone back to pre-pandemic levels, which the other G7 economies have done, and they are doing far better than they were kind of pre-pandemic. Germany, the only outlier there, only at 0.6%. That's because they've been badly impacted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, along with Italy as well. But the impact on the UK should be far less than the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That impact should be far less on the UK than the other two countries mentioned, Germany and Italy. But you know, it's not. It's the global factors. You know, it's never Brexit. It's always global factors. So I agree with the gentleman from the SNP here. I think that Brexit has really strengthened the SNP's campaign to get an independence referendum and to vote to leave the Union. I just wonder when that referendum is going to happen and who's going to be Prime Minister when it does, because that will be the breakup of the Union as we know it. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.